Okay, I'm going to ask you a question just to get us started, Subhuti.
Okay.
Very simple question just to get the ball rolling. So can you tell us about your first memory of meeting or encountering or even maybe hearing about Bhante?
Oh. It's curious. I had sort of footprints. I saw footprints for about 2 years before I actually met him.
Okay.
I studied in London, in Kentish Town, and my digs were 100 yards from the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara. And as it turns out, I must have arrived about a week after Bhante left the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara. And I remember going past the Vihara, and it was rather forbidding and very closed. Then the next thing I remember was going to Kentish Town tube station, and it was closed. So, judging by the dates, it was the day that Terry committed suicide. Some people will know the story. Bhante's very close friend. And two more, but we're nearly there. I used to walk on Hampstead Heath, which is a very large, lovely area of North London, and parts of it quite wild. And I was sitting on a bench one day, and a typical Californian hippie came and sat down next to me. And as you would imagine, we shared a certain substance. And he told me about his Buddhist guru, and he pointed behind him and he said, he lives over there. So this was the famous Carter. Those of you who know the story will have heard of him. I'm not going to tell you the story now. And then I was coming back from the Heath, probably somewhat elevated, and I saw a figure coming towards me, and I was immediately struck because, first of all, he was wearing a cape, a big, long cloak, brown cloak, and I could see flashes of orange underneath it because he wore a cloak over his yellow robes, his orange robes. The second thing was that he had long hair with big mutton chop sideburns, and he was an older man. So that sort of strange sight was pretty normal in London in the 60s, but not from somebody in their 40s, because Bhante would have been just 40 at that time. But the memory is seared into my mind. I can see it absolutely clearly now, because having been arrested, caught by the figure, I was struck by his demeanor. He seemed entirely self-possessed. He's completely, well, I suppose what I would now say is mindful. I wouldn't have known how to say it then. But I remember the thought that came to me is, that is a real adult. You know, because when you're young, you have this idea of adults being mature. And then as you get older, you realize they're just big children. And the impression I got was that this was a man who had actually matured himself. And we just passed. He didn't look at me. He was looking down at the ground, the famous plough's length in front of him, hurrying, but without rushing, if you see what I mean. He was purposive without scurrying. So that was my first actual sighting and some footprints. What about you, Parami? What was your first contact or footprint?
Am I near enough the mic? Can people hear okay at the back? Yeah. So my first contact with Bhante was through the written word.
Huh.
Not only book, but also letter correspondence. So I found my way into the Glasgow Buddhist Centre in 1977. And at the end of this first evening, actually, I suppose the very first encounter was hearing a talk by Bhante, which was the nucleus of a new society. A series of talks that he'd given the year before, 76, in Brighton. And at the end of I've got quite strong memories of that evening, actually. At the end of the talk, I had lots of questions. And there was an order member not in the class, but he came in the door just at the end of the class, and he's in the room. It was Dhammarathi. And I said to him, I think I know you. And he said, yeah, you sort of look familiar. And I said, is your name Ian? And he said, no, it's Dhammarathi. And I was like, what? What kind of name's that? So he explained what it meant and how he'd been given it. And I don't know if Damarati remembers this, but we ended up talking till about 2:00 in the morning. Not unusual since then, but and then you walked me a bit up the road to where I was staying. And Damarati I wanted to know more. I mean, even just that, hearing that one lecture, I was completely in fire and I wanted to know more. So Damarati gave me a book to read, which was The Three Jewels. There weren't that many books published at the time. And I was working in a Glasgow University library. So the next day I went into work and I kind of went and hid in the basement and pretended I was cataloguing books and read the entire Three Jewels. In a day and a bit of the next day. And then I wrote to Bhante loads of questions from my reading of it, which he told me later was fairly unusual, that he didn't get many people writing who had obviously read so thoroughly. So he wrote back and he answered all my questions, maybe about 2 weeks later, something like that. I got a letter from him. I was very excited. And at the end, he said, if you're ever passing through Norfolk, come and visit. I didn't even really know where Norfolk was. I was in Scotland, in Glasgow. Norfolk seemed like a very long way away. So I didn't pass by. But in fact, that was near the end of 77. And in February 78, my mother died. And I wrote to Bhante and told him, and he said, come and visit. So I made a trip down to visit him in Padmaloka, which had hardly been opened, really.
Yeah.
And so I went in to see him in his room. And actually, Subhuti might not remember this either, but you came and picked me up from Street Farm
to
take me over.
I vaguely remember.
Yeah. And, we sat and talked for ages, maybe about 2 hours. And then Buddhadasa took me back. And he said, well, that was a long time. What did you talk about? And actually, to be honest, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
We did talk about the fact that all my nearest relations had died in the previous couple of years. I don't even really remember very much about that. I just remember feeling that I'd really met somebody that was going to be important in my life. So that was my first meetings through, letters and then. And I'm afraid I have to confess, I'm a very bad disciple because I never kept any of the letters or cards or anything that Bhante sent me. And he sent me quite a lot over the years.
They'll be in the...
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Well, the ones from him are okay. But I used to write Bhante letters that were like about 14 pages long about how I was going to be a bodhisattva within, a couple of weeks or something, probably. I was naive. I was young. So that's my first stories. So you've told us about how yours is quite an interesting, I've heard you talk about that before, seeing this figure and then later. So what was the later? When did you actually come to have a conversation or realise that person who had walked past you on Hampstead Heath was in fact Bhante?
I think I didn't realise actually till quite a lot later, but I put it all together. I was at that time living with now Marichi, and she heard an interview with Bhante on Woman's Hour with Anne Bancroft. And in the course of this interview, that was in the days when Woman's Hour dealt with knitting and things like that, and cooking. But in the course of this interview, he described the centre in Monmouth Street near Seven Dials, not far from Trafalgar Square, for those who know London at all. And he described that he was doing meditation classes. And so some discussion then arose, I wasn't listening to this, it was reported to me, about young people today and drugs and all that sort of thing. And so the interviewer asked Bhante, what would you do if a hippie came along. So Bhante then said, well, I would invite them downstairs and teach them to meditate. And so I thought, this is a man for me. And fairly soon after that, I went to a class. It was very strange. You can still see the shop where the centre was, 14 Monmouth Street. It's worth a pilgrimage. It's quite a small shop, and it was a Zen shop. It didn't sell anything. And it was the front for an order member, one of the first order members, who was a specialist in Japanese lacquer work. So it was his sort of shop window. At the back, there was a narrow winding stairs going down into the basement, which was partly under the road. So I went down there, and there was on one side a room which was full of people. I mean, about 15. It was a very small room. And I was extremely shy at that time. I still am. But I went in and I did what any sensible shy person does, which is make for the notice board and scrupulously look at all the notices without noticing anything, hoping that nobody's noticing me. But I sensed a presence behind me, and sitting in a sort of armchair with talking to people was a very, very strange figure. It was Bhante, of course. He was very, very relaxed, sort of hyper relaxed, if you see what I mean, and not a tension in his body. And he had lots of rings on his fingers. I later asked him what was the significance of the rings. He just said, people gave them to me. And which is quite interesting, because that was Bhante. Bhante was a man who made connections, and he honoured those connections. He was wearing a robe which looked slightly grubby, and I did notice he followed Indian customs still and sort of blew his nose on a corner of his robe. I'm sure he didn't actually excrete anything, but I was fascinated and both, really appalled and fascinated and terrified. He looked really wild. He looked like a jungle animal or something like that. The image that came to my mind was of a lion, but it was a lion who'd just eaten something that had filled him up. So he was dangerous, but at the moment not dangerous, because he was satisfied. That was the immediate impression I had, that he was not bound by convention. He wasn't bothered by convention. So it's a deep impression. And he then took us into the shrine room and taught meditation, taught the mindfulness of breathing. I had instant dhyana. I'm still struggling to get there again, but instantly, because of the atmosphere that he generated. Very gently, he led us through, not all the talking that people do through meditation these days, which I abhor, just introduced each stage and left us to it, which is what should be done. And afterwards, maybe that week, another week, there was a question and answer session. This story is oft repeated. Sorry, Parami. But it was a small room. I was sitting on one side. He was sitting on the other. It was supposed to be a Zen shrine room. It had been set up by Emil Boyne as a Zen shrine room, but there wasn't room for two platforms, so there was only one down one side. Bhante was sitting on that, a slightly raised sort of platform, leaning again very, very comfortably against the wall, and we were firing questions at him. I just astonished at the agility of his mind, his extraordinary erudition, his capacity to put very complicated matters in extremely simple terms, and his deep knowledge and love of Western culture. He knew his art, because that was a big question for me. Was I going to have to leave behind being a Brit, if you like, or being a European? And I was just completely mesmerized, and I just started looking at him, and he started looking at me. Well, if you're a middle-class English person of a certain kind, and you don't look at somebody in the eyes. So, normally what happens if somebody looks in the eyes, you look away. after a brief nod, you look away. But I looked at him, he looked at me, I looked at him, he looked at me, and much longer than is polite or decent, as it were. But I felt he was really seeing me. And it was a bit like being with a karate master who's saying, okay, let's see what you're made of. Let's see what you can do. It wasn't exactly challenging, but he certainly wasn't backing down or making concessions to me. He was sort of saying, okay, let's meet. So that was my first experience of him. A little later, I asked if I could see him because I had come to the conclusion I wanted to make Buddhism my life, and I just assumed I'd have to go to the East. So I asked for an interview. It's actually at the centre, I think. No. He asked me to come up to his flat on Highgate West Hill. Anybody who know it, with backing onto the heath. And we talked there, and he said, no, you don't need to go to the East. In fact, better not. We've got it all here. And he said it with such conviction that I just never even inquired. I just thought, okay, it's all here. And one other thing about this, we travelled together to the class, and he travelled in mufti. He travelled in his civvies, in his ordinary dress. And he was carrying his robes with him. And so I started sort of questioning him about robes. Why was he wearing robes? Why did he use robes? And slightly aggressively, probably. But he was just quite cool about it. He said, I find it convenient. He didn't explain more at the time. But he wasn't fazed at all by my, as I say, slightly impolite and aggressive questioning. Yeah, so that'll do for now. What about the next stages in your encounter?
Gosh, it is a long time ago. So I think maybe the next times that I actually spent time with Bhante was on seminars. So when Bhante lived at Padmaloka in the late 70s, early 80s, he did a series of study seminars for women. And the community that lived at Padmaloka all moved out and we moved in. And I think I attended 4 or 5 of those seminars. Yeah, Jewel Ornament of Liberation, Spiral Path, a couple of different extracts from the Jewel Ornament, a Milarepa, if I remember. Anyway, I mean, it was, when I read those seminar notes these days, it's a little bit embarrassing for a number of reasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One is that I talk a lot.
No, Parami, I can't believe.
So you get a short question from somebody and a great big long answer, Sangharakshita, or S, great big long answer. Anne Macmillan, great big long question. Sangharakshita, great big long answer. Anne Macmillan, great big long question. And it kind of goes on like that quite a lot. Now, I discovered years later that Bhante specially wanted me invited because I would ask questions. Because people would often be very quiet and shy. And I'd like to think I gave space, but they didn't take it. But I can't guarantee. I really cannot guarantee that that was the case.
No comment.
No comment. But it's not just that. I mean, some of the questions are terrible. They're just like embarrassing. I don't know. Anyway, Bhante was always very kind in his responses. He always took questions really seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other people in this room that, you know, have had that experience. And, you know, I'm sure I can see a couple of people that were even on some of those seminars. And the other thing to say is they were also quite boring a lot of the time, because I have a one memory of being in a seminar where we heard a lot about the curtains and the tablecloths in the men's community at the LBC. I have no idea why, but it did go on for quite some time. And I think I probably phased out and wasn't really paying that much attention. And then he suddenly would start talking about the bodhicitta. And it was like a kind of, it wasn't just because that was a topic that interested and moved me, but there was something about the way Bhante talked about that just brought the whole thing alive, really. So my memories of those seminars are incredibly positive, with some little moments of, why are we talking about this? And I did a couple of them as a mitra and then as a very young order member, new order member. And one of my memories, at least of a couple of those, was that the men, this was at the period where men and women were starting to do activities, single sex, men were men, women were women. When I first came along, all the order weekends were mixed. And then at some point that changed. And the men had got Padmaloka, and also quite a few men had been ordained in like the late 70s, early 80s, because you had Tuscany, I think, at that point. Just started, if I remember correctly. And so one of the seminars, Bhante just kept going on about when would the women get a retreat centre? When would the women get a retreat centre? And we'd have order meetings in the evening with him, and he would go on about when would the women get a retreat centre. And in retrospect, it was incredibly encouraging and supportive, because what he really wanted was for the women to feel, a necessary sense of independence at that time, because things had been so mixed. And also because there was an awful lot more men order members than women order members at that time. I think he really wanted us to find the conditions to let the women's side of things flourish. But it was quite irritating at the time, because I think it was hard for us to hear it in a way that was really positive. And rather than like, well, the men have got this and why haven't you got it? Rather than hearing, well, the men are getting on with that, but let's see what we can do to help you. So that's a kind of particular period, I guess, where I had quite a lot of contact with Bhante. Also, I was at the time secretary of the LBC, and which meant I had quite a lot of contact with Bhante, and things like I'd go with him to pick a birthday present for his mum and things like that. And he would have something that he'd want to convey to the women's wing, or broader than just me, but he would tell me, and then he would kind of let me loose with it. So, and in a way, my relationship with Bhante had that for a long time, because when I was order convener, I had that as well, where Bhante would tell me something that he wanted conveyed to other people, which wasn't always comfortable, to be honest. But in another way, I once said to him, but X isn't going to like that. And he said, no, I know.
That's why I'm getting you to do it.
Exactly. And I said, well, why are you telling me to tell them? He said, because it's better that they fall out with you than they fall out with me. Because he was this person's preceptor, and he, I suppose, felt it was better that they fell out with a lowly dharmacharani rather than their preceptor or teacher. So, yeah, it's a little bit all over the place, but it's just as memories come, really, I suppose, that there's some of the stories that come to life. Yeah, I mean, there's loads. Actually, just as I'm sitting here, I'm getting quite a lot of memories kind of coming to me. But I think I'll move back to Subhuti now. I mean, you, Subhuti, you had a long working relationship with Bhante, and I know that it wasn't always easy. And that even, you might say, I hope I can say this, you had your moments where you felt even a bit alienated from, a bit distanced, didn't you? Maybe not alienated, but a bit distanced. Well,
there's two sort of periods to talk about, really. I was Bhante's secretary from after we'd completed the LBC, and I'd been chair there for a year. So it must have been 79. Yeah.
79.
I went at Bhante's request to write a book which has now fallen out of print, sadly, because I think it's still a very valuable book, called Buddhism for Today. Bhante specifically asked me to go and write it, a book about the movement. So I went off to a Greek island, sad, isn't it? And in winter, though, it has to be said, which was wonderful because it was completely deserted. And I wrote manuscript and brought it back in my luggage. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd left the community I was living in, Subhuti community at the LBC, and I hadn't got a plan of what I was going to do next. I deliberately didn't want to know what I was going to do. I can't help but to mention this. I was very much into the Greeks, obviously being in Greece, and I got into the idea of an oracle. So I remember one day walking along and saying, I'll call on Apollo. Apollo and Manjushri were sort of aligned in some way. And so I said, what shall I do next? And the voice, this doesn't happen to me often, said, follow the path that lies before you. I said, yeah, come on. Especially we have a bit more instruction than that. It just came back, follow the path that lies before you. Okay. So I didn't know what to do with that. Came back to England. There was a convention going on. I arrived at the convention. I was met by Sona, who told me, I've taken your luggage to Padmaloka. And I didn't know that I was going to Padmaloka. I'm completely happy to do whatever Bhante wanted. Bhante wanted me to go to Padmaloka to be his secretary. So this has actually been the story of my life. Almost everything I've done because Bhante asked me to do it, which is a great privilege to have it out of one's hands and in the hands of somebody one has deep trust in that sense. So I became Bhante's secretary, but my experience with Bhante as his secretary was that he and I worked very, very well together. Apparently he told somebody that, Subhuti, I don't need to say much, and he grasps what I'm getting at and knows what to do. That's my particular sort of character. It's not something I've ever developed. It's just given. Yeah, so we worked really well on that level. I understood what he was trying to do. I understood what he wanted me to do. I was completely confident to do it. But in a strange sort of personal way, I didn't really connect with him in a certain way. What I realized later was, of course, I wanted something from him, and he would not give you what you wanted. Yeah, Kalamitra nodding his head vigorously. He just would not give you. If you wanted something, he wouldn't give it. I mean, emotionally, neurotically, I wanted his approval. We all wanted to be loved by Bhante. We were young. We wanted to be loved by Bhante. And the old fellow wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it like that. Of course, he did do it with some. Why not me? Well, except I didn't want that. But so it's actually quite painful. Extremely rewarding working so closely with a genius at the time that the movement was being created out of his mouth. He spoke the movement into existence. And he described me as his right-hand man. I was working very, very closely with him. And yet he didn't ask about me, didn't seem particularly interested in me. And it's very painful. I now take responsibility for that. And I recognize, because other people seem to manage to connect with him, that it was a failing in me, which I'm not upset about or anything like that. But it was very painful at the time. I never blamed him, but I felt really sort of distance from him. And I remember that we went up from, this is a slightly earlier period, but it came into play then. We went up to Glasgow for Dhanavira and Dipankara's ordination, which was on an island in the Clyde estuary, Cumbria. And Cumbria. Were you there, Kulamitra? Yeah. And I'd gone up, which was very tough, the building period at the LBC. We ran out of money. We had one skilled man, Atula, and a load of very unskilled people. And I was, leading it, and it was quite a challenge to me. And again, I was feeling quite unsupported. And I was going up to Glasgow to see Bhante for the ordination, and I was going to get Bhante's commiseration, support, understanding, sympathy. Not a bit of it. We had one talk in which I felt, it's my feeling, that he sort of, put up a barrier. I was feeling more and more sort of unhappy and left out. I think I wanted acknowledgement for the role that I was playing. Bhante didn't do that. He's a tantric guru. That's not his job. It's not his job to be a social worker or a daddy, far less a mummy, which is probably what I really wanted. But at the end, we were just packing up. And the red van, if you remember the red van, was standing there and people were putting luggage on the roof. And, we were totally illegal, probably 15 of us sitting on a mattress in the back. Nowadays, just wouldn't wash. Those were the days. And I was sort of standing there, not exactly supervising, because Purna was in charge of all that. And Bhante came out. And he did something that he'd done a few times with me. I was standing there and he'd walk up and down, 2 paces this way, 2 paces that way, 2 paces this way, 2 paces that way. And as he walked up and down, just out of the blue, he said, "It's strange. There are people you can get close to and there are people you can work with, but they're not the same people." And, I've told this story a number of times and people always, "Oh, that was harsh," or something like that. But actually he was saying, I can work with you, but I can't really get close to you. It's not, the two don't go together, if you like. And probably my personality wasn't of the right kind, as it were, to get close to him in that sort of way. But that did relieve me of quite a bit of burden. That's that period.
That's all right.
I'll go on to the next one since you asked. Since you want to drag up all my pain.
There wouldn't be time for mine. So
I'm fishing, don't worry, I'm coming for you. So, I know a story too myself about him and you. But anyway, this was quite late on, actually. It was in the early 2000s. He just appointed me the first chair of the college. First of all, he told me I was chair for life. I was sensible enough to say, I think that might not be wise. I think it should be a 5-yearly term. To my credit.
you did. You did.
And as a blessing to all of you, of course, because I'd still be chair of the college. But of course, this was the period when all the revelations were coming. First of all, 97, the famous Guardian article. And then in 2003, a further wave of revelation and upset. It's not that I didn't know about Bhante's sexual activity. I knew all about it. I was a non-combatant. I did say that to Bhante. Well, Bhante, you never had sex with me. He said, "No, I didn't." Far too ugly. It's strange. It was actually difficult not to, because what did that mean? If you see what I mean, we were so immature, even in our 50s. And I found it really tough because it had been sort of open. Everybody knew about it, but Bhante didn't talk about it. It wasn't something you could talk about. And it really was open. It's a myth that this was all covered up. It wasn't at all. Everybody knew. But as far as I'm aware. It wasn't a sort of topic of conversation, and certainly not with Bhante. And to be frank, I didn't like the way he responded at the time. I'm not going to go into details, but I felt as chair of the college, I was left very, very exposed, without any weapons in my hands, as it were. And I remember the worst period, I was invited to do an interview by the World Service, which had done a lot of programs for us, and they felt they had to do one after all this came out. And so I went down like a lamb to the slaughter. Bush House is on the embankment, and I remember walking onto, it would be Westminster Bridge, and just looking down into the grey depths of the Thames and thinking, that would sort it all out. But of course, that would be the coward's way. And probably, it didn't look very inviting. I'd probably a long, slow death. But I went into this interview, and of course, I was completely helpless. I had nothing I could really say, because I didn't understand what had been going on. I didn't understand how it had all gone wrong, as it were. And it was a real low point for me. And a few other incidents that took place. So I didn't like the way Bhante responded to certain things, not of that kind, but other kinds. And a sort of coolness grew between us. Nothing stated. We're both English. And we didn't have it out. And we just sort of didn't talk, really, didn't communicate. And that was very, very painful. I'd lived my life on the basis of his vision. I'd formed myself on his teaching, and I couldn't swallow it down, and I couldn't spit it out. I was sort of stuck with it in relation to this man who had an area of his life that I didn't really understand and that didn't look good, if you see what I mean. It took some time to come to terms with that, which is another story. But really by 2009, when I did that interview with him that came out we did the first one on what is the Western Buddhist order. I was part of that. And then another one on, which we call the sex conversation. And then after that, I had a series of conversations with him about Dhamma, which was really a high point of my experience of Bhante. Just being in that kind of dialogue with him, where our minds really met. And he did most of the running, but I was pushing him and getting clarification. It's just wonderful communication. And so I sort of resolved it. I sort of learned how to see Bhante both as this utterly exceptional individual with clearly a consciousness way beyond mine. And at the same time, well, as he put it to me, a somewhat messy life. Again, if we got time, I'll just tell you the resolving moment. You can have a go in a moment. But I remember Bhante had this period of intense sleeplessness, which was medicated, and the medication made it worse. His system was very sensitive. So they gave him temazepam, which now is not prescribed, and which basically just made him completely sleepless for weeks on end. He got hardly any sleep. And, the Stasi, the secret police in Germany, didn't use the thumbscrews of the Gestapo. They just kept people awake. And if you keep people awake for long enough, they'll tell you anything. So he was finding it really difficult. He never unethical, but he just couldn't sort of organize his experience. So he wanted somebody with him all the time. And we would be rotated, actually, to sit with him. And so I was sitting with him, and he kept on taking his blood pressure. So there's nothing more calculated to send your blood pressure up than taking your blood pressure. I just buried my mother, who was 92, and I thought to myself, if that was my mother, I'd just take that away. I couldn't do that. Of course, it was Bhante. And then he got worried because somebody was supposed to come at 1 o'clock, and it was about 2 minutes to. Could I go and check the clock in the hall? What time did my clock say? He'd become a fussy old man. A fussy old man, because that's what happens when the whole system, the psychophysical system, is not working properly. And I remember the thought went through my mind, how can this man be my teacher? And absolutely at that moment, I can only tell you my experience, I experienced his mind. I experienced like the blue sky, the famous blue sky, this infinite mind. And I got to see, it took me a while to digest it, he was both. He was both that really exalted mind, well, more than exalted, beyond exaltation, but vast mind, vast consciousness. And he was a fussy old man who had been a bit messy in his dealings in some ways. Most not, but in some areas. And I had to sort of learn how to put it all together. Every one of us nowadays coming in contact with the movement has to do that. We have to be able to accommodate both dimensions of Bhante. And that, for me, came quite late, really, when I was a very senior order member, had been the chair of the college. It came quite late because I'd just been working for him and we didn't have that sort of personal relationship. I think your relationship was very different, but I think you did have some difficulties. And if you don't remember any, I will nudge you.
Are you thinking about when he fired me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you might be. Kulamitra laughing because he lived through that period as well. You had to do the firing, that's right, on Bante's behalf. It wasn't where I was planning to go in this conversation, but anyway, thank you. So I was ordained in 1980, and in March 1980, when I moved from West London, where I'd been living, to East London, to the LBC, to become the secretary of the LBC, Kulamitra was chair by then, and Tejamati was treasurer. So the three of us were the triumvirate with a council of people. I'd only been ordained a few months, and actually it was a big responsibility. I mean, the LBC at that time was pretty much the FWBO in that part of the world. Anyway, so a number of factors are at play here. One of them was that there were very few women order members at the time, and quite a number of them, capable and inspiring, had kids, so they weren't as available as maybe some children, children,
kids.
Kiddies. So they weren't that available to do
Girls,
things,
yes.
small things, yeah. Although they did also do retreats and things, but in terms of running classes or being public, there weren't very many women who were available. And of those that were available, I was probably the most extrovert of the lot of them. So whoever they were, they'd be somebody organising an event would be wanting a women order member to give a talk. And everybody would say no, and it'd come to me and I'd go, I can do it. I had been a little bit of a performer before I got involved in the movement. And I think I carried some of that into my order life at the beginning. Anyway, I basically got a bit up myself. Sorry, that's a hard expression to translate. My head got a bit big. I became a bit, I don't know how to say it in another way. A bit
inflated.
Ego inflated. Okay. My ego got too big for itself. And for a number of reasons, this got to Bhante. And there were a number of things that happened. I won't go into all the details of them, but poor Kulamitra had been in an order weekend up at Padmaloka, I think, came back and asked me to come and have a chat, and we had a chat, and he told me that Bhante thought I should stop being secretary of the LBC. He basically fired me from the job, and I was furious. I was so angry. I threw a telephone out the window. Well, I threw a telephone out the window. Fortunately, the window was open, so it went out the window. I was young. I was impulsive. And then I went and phoned Padmaloka, and Subhuti answered the phone. And I said, I need to speak to Bhante immediately. And you said, okay, hang on. And you went off and said to Bhante it was me on the phone and asked if he would speak to me. I think that's how I remember it anyway. And he came and he took the telephone and I said, I'm really angry. And he went, And I said, why did you do that? And he said, Well, he said, Parami, I think you're, what was it? How was it he put it? I had outstripped my spiritual depth.
Ah.
That was how he put it. And I talked to him many times about this later years, and he said that what he saw happen with me was that there was a really good kind of impulse there. You know, in a way, a kind of slightly twisted bodhisattva impulse. So I would respond to things, everything. And because I've got a lot of energy and I could respond to things, I would basically start to believe something that wasn't quite true. So yeah, he was right. I had outstripped myself spiritually. So he stopped me in my tracks. He did say to me afterwards there weren't many people he could do that with. Yeah. And I took it actually in the long run as a compliment. That
he told me that after you came up to see him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel slightly emotional remembering this because it was a really strong experience. Because he sent for me, he said to come up and see him. And I went up to see him. And by that time, I wasn't angry. I was just upset. And he said that to me. And he said he thought, and he said some people just have capacity, but you can go beyond your capacity. You need to kind of catch up on it. So he put me under what he laughingly called house arrest. So I was living in one of the communities, and whenever I was asked to do anything, I had to ask his permission. And I think that went on for about 2 years. Yes. That I'd have to go and say, the LBC went me to lead a retreat, and he'd say, okay. And then I'd go and say something else and say, no, I don't think so. So I was very privileged actually that he took such a personal kind of interest in me. But it was shockingly embarrassing at the time. And it was so public. Yeah. Because I'd been so kind of out there and everybody virtually knew me quite well. It was a great fall from grace, and it was the best thing that could have happened and the worst thing that could have, the pain. It was a really, really painful kind of experience. Kulamitra and I are still friends. Took a while, but we got there. And there were other people at the LBC, I have to say, at the time, who I think took a bit too much delight in my downfall. Probably because I'd trodden on their toes along the way. And so I've had to make a lot of amends over the years and have had to kind of follow things up a lot with people. And so there was a period of a couple of years where I had that kind of relationship. Bhante, so there you go. That's the potted version. There's lots of other little stories attached around it, but I think that'll do. So I'm just wondering what the timing is, how much longer we've got, and does anybody know for online people?
Is it 5
Shall we just carry on?
5 o'clock, I think we're supposed to go. Yeah.
Okay, so there's something I'd like to share, but I'd also like to come back to you and just...
Do you want to share it first?
Oh, no, you do it.
Okay.
Best moment with Bhante, ever.
Oh. Well, no question, ordination. Absolutely no question. I remember my ordination as if it's happening now, my private ordination especially. This is 1973. I was 24. And we had a retreat in Thetford Forest, Broomhouse Farm. And I think there were about 12 of us, quite small place. And the private ordination took place in a bedroom upstairs, which had been cleared, and a shrine made there. And so the time came for me to go in. I was the fourth of 5. Chintamani was the last. Hridaya was the first. So I went into the private shrine room. This is probably 2.5 hours. The whole thing's been going on already. So it was getting, a bit difficult at 24 to have to wait that long. And Bhante was sitting there beside the shrine in his robe. But the immediate impression was that the way I thought of it at the time is the monk, not that monk, the monk, if you see what I mean. He carried something far more than himself, far, far more than himself. And the ceremony, just sort of conducts itself. But he didn't sort of really connect with you in it. I mean, in a personal way. There's no, oh, hello, how are you?
Yeah.
Oh, please take a seat. He just, it's sitting there. It's fairly obvious where you had to sit. You sat. There's your candle. There's your flower. There's your stick of incense. Just held it out and you offer it. But I was already in a completely different dimension. I was doing what I really wanted to do. I was doing what I'd been born to do. This is what I'd come here for. I say that without any hyperbole. That was the feeling I had. This is what my life is about. And we went through the ceremony. He asked me, is there any Buddha or Bodhisattva to whom you are particularly attracted? So in all honesty, I could only say no. I thought I was going to ask for Manjushri because I like the sword. But he asked the question in such a way that I just had to say no. So he gave me the Vajrasattva mantra. I'd never met the gentleman before. I didn't know them. I didn't know the mantra. And, you know, we did it call and response and we stumbled our way through it, but didn't sort of matter. I felt I was being given the greatest gift I could possibly be given. And I just, for weeks, for months, perhaps even for years afterwards, I just was carried by that momentum. In a way, well, no, I am still carried by that momentum. It's a little more complicated now because I've discovered more of myself that needs including. But that is unquestionably the high point of my life. And the sort of everything led up to it and everything has led away from it.
A fulcrum moment. A
fulcrum moment. And I've never regretted it. I've never reneged on it, as it were. I did have my sort of period of crisis with Bhante, but oddly, I never lost my confidence in Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, and through him, really. So that moment has defined my whole life. It probably should have defined it much more than it has done, but it's still very much alive in me. I'm there in that room as I'm describing it to you. I'm there in it. It's absolutely with me all the time. So that was my peak with Bhante. And you?
Okay, I'm going to give you 2. That's all right.
Oh, that's cheating.
Yeah, I know. Well, I wouldn't say too much about my ordination because in some ways it was a very similar experience because Bhante was also my private and public preceptor. And so I'll just say a couple of things about the ceremony. So one of them was the moment of taking on a Buddha or Bodhisattva. And he said to me, well, I imagine you know which Bodhisattva you would like to take. And I said, well, I've been thinking Padmasambhava. And he went, no. He said, I don't think so. I said, oh, okay. I said, actually, to be fair, I had kind of let that go and I had been wondering about Manjughosha. And he said, no. And I said, but I was on solitary retreat maybe a few weeks before my ordination. And I said, and actually Avalokiteshvara appeared to me and he went, oh yes, that's so much better. And I asked him afterwards why he had said that. And he said, I don't really think I need to explain.
No.
So that's one little moment of it. And the other one that was really important to me was when he gave me my name. And I couldn't remember it the next day, actually. He's completely gone out of my head. These days, we often give people a little card or a bit of paper with a name on it. He just said it once.
Really?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. Anyway, but he just said it. He said, yes, and your name will be Parami. And he said, but what I remember is he said, that will always remind you of the Bodhisattva ideal, and that is what your Buddhism has been about and will always be about. So that just felt like I felt very seen. But the other memory I wanted to share, and this will be of interest to some of the women in the room that I have actually publicly ordained in particular. So in 2012, 12, we purchased and we moved here. But Banty being Banty had been preparing for this move for quite some time before we moved. Years. So as soon as he agreed to start looking somewhere, which I think was 2009, something like that.
Earlier.
A bit earlier. He started to pack. He got Paramartha to start packing. Anyway, I had become a public preceptor in 2004. In 2009 or 10, I think, Banty sent for me and he said, I have something for you. And he gave me a John Lewis carrier bag. It's very ritual, this moment. Inside this John Lewis carrier bag, wrapped up in a kata, one of these Tibetan scarves, and a bit of kind of tissue paper that looked like it had seen better days, was his initiation vase. And that was the vase that he used when he ordained, I think all of us that he ordained publicly. I think it's the one that you can see on the refuge tree painting, sitting beside him. And I opened it, it was just kind of in the middle, just wrapped up in this. And he said, I really wanted you to have this when you became a public preceptor, but I couldn't find it. He said, and Paramartha found it for me the other day. And I remembered that I wanted to give it to you, to kind of say, well done for becoming a public preceptor. So, I mean, that was just, I can't really describe how I felt when he gave me that. And me being me, I could have felt a bit, oh, look at me. Mwah, mwah, mwah. You know, I felt really humbled. And I felt like he wasn't really giving it to me as a kind of thing or a gift. It was more like a recognition of legacy, but also, what's the word? Lineage. It felt like it was me really taking my place in the lineage that he had set in motion and that I've been able to then, help other women to come into that lineage. So that for me was maybe even more of a peak moment than my own ordination, but they don't really feel separate. They feel like they were two bits of the same experience. So there you go.
There we go.
Wow. Thank you very much. You've taken us on a real journey. I mean, it's fascinating to hear anyone's encounter with the Dharma, and even more so fascinating when it happened at the early stages and the beginnings of the movement. And I was particularly delighted to hear about a version of Bhante that's very different to the one I remember. I know a much younger Bhante lying there very relaxed, and the way he responded to the sort of existential dilemmas and questions of young, enthusiastic Dharma practitioners. I was also quite struck by him telling Subhuti that he didn't need to go to the East because we have it all here. And if you had it all there then, well, what do we have now? He had it all. He had it all. It was all up in the mind. And also, I'm often reflecting and thinking about how grateful I am to the early order members, to you and others who have done so much to build the institutions and what we have these days. But recently I'm more and more grateful for the challenges that you faced, the difficulty of having a flesh and blood teacher and working with him and the complexity of that. And, in the last, I'm in my 4th year chair at Adhisthana, and challenges, it's sometimes difficulty and challenges arises. And I sort of think, I feel sorry for myself. And then, but hearing about, what it must have been like to be, working with someone like Bhante and the complexity and what you went through, I'm just incredibly, grateful for that. And you're still here, still giving yourselves, still serving, and very, very, very openly sharing your experience. So thank you. And when they say goodbye, it's just us in the room now. Well, are you still up for? Yeah. So now that we've
both extroverts, you can't stop us.
Now that it's just us in the room,
Briggs.
we've got the opportunity to ask questions. And would you like to host this yourselves, or would you like
to what?
Host it yourselves, or do you want me to field questions for you?
I think you could.
You feel, yeah.
I'll field questions. Okay.
Anybody who asks difficult questions, just shut.
Okay, so only one really, really easy question.
Only nice questions.
Hands up.
You don't have to, of course.
Prakasha Mitra.
How much were you given responsibility by Bhante? How much did you take?
Is that both of us?
So how much were you given responsibility by Bhante, and how much did you take it?
For myself, I was ordained in 1973, in November 1973. I was 24 at the time. A few weeks later, I was 25. But shortly after I was ordained, Bhante took me for a meal. It was an Indian meal, a thali plate I'd never had before. And over the thali plate, Lokamitra was there, Vajrakumara was there, over this meal, which was, something I'd never encountered before. Bhante told me he wanted to be chair of the centre. Just, 3 months after my ordination. And he said, yes, so I want you to take on the chair, and I want a really vigorous chairmanship. So I would never have thought of taking that on. And again, Bhante has asked me to do things, and I'm very glad it's worked like that. I think my nature is to serve. So having somebody to serve was very, very important to me, and relieved me of the burden of, ego, if you like. And I'm very fortunate that I served somebody who seemed to see what I was capable of and constantly stretched me. He told me once that myself and Lokamitra were the only people he'd really pushed beyond their limits, and found that we could go beyond those limits. So I was really up for it. I had somebody who was giving me responsibility. I've hardly ever could say that I've, as it were, just volunteered to do something. If there's something to be done, I will do it. But yeah, for me, it's being given responsibility that has been one of the greatest gifts I've had. I think I've grown more through taking responsibility within the context of the spiritual community. That has been my principal point of growth, supported by everything else like meditation and study of the Dhamma, friendship particularly. But for me, my character actually undertaking a task, and which is a responsibility in relation to other people, in relation to the Dhamma, has been the major focus of my spiritual life, for which I'm very, very grateful to Bhante. And particularly because I was able to contribute at a time when it was all coming into existence. It was tiny to begin with, and it just grew, mushroomed over the period that I was with him as secretary.
Yeah, probably a bit of both for me. I think probably sometimes I saw something that needed done and I kind of moved into it. But I also had the experience of Bhante kind of asking me to do things. The thing about becoming secretary of the LBC, I think Kulamitra probably asked me initially, or Tejamati, one of you two had suggested it. And I was like, I've been ordained a month, 2 months or something. But I went to Crete on a holiday with Ratnamala, some of you know. And we were standing in Crete and the bus came in. I can't remember what the town was called. The bus came in and I said, oh my God, that looks like Bhante in the back seat. There's a man with a hat. It's 40 degrees and he's wearing this fur hat. And he and Kevala were having a holiday.
I remember, yeah.
Crete. But he'd gone off. It was a secret holiday. Nobody was supposed to know where he was. And I'd managed to find myself in exactly the same town. And it really it was. I didn't know he was there. Anyway, he said, "Oh, hello, Parami." And off we went. He invited us for a pizza. And we went for a pizza, the four of us. And I mentioned that I'd been asked about being secretary of the LBC, and he chuckled and said, "Yes, I know." Anyway, and I said, "So I'm wondering, I haven't been ordained very long." And he said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, just do it." So I did. So in a way, and there were other things along the way that, Bhante would kind of suggest or say, yeah, go ahead. So it was a bit of both. But I mean, I think we're a bit similar in character. We've got differences, partly conditioning as much as anything. But I think character-wise, we've got similarities. Yep. I'm nicer, but, but I think I'm also somebody that grew through taking responsibility and through having, I think also because I've got I think I can say this, my energy can be really a bit disruptive. So I think if I hadn't had something, I'm being honest, I think if I hadn't had a really important things to put my energy into, and in a way the Dharma was big enough. Yeah. And Sri Ratna and Bhante, they were kind of big enough to give me a container. I think otherwise I would have been dead, if not dead, like just really not a very good person to be around, because my energy was pretty all over the place.
I think we're probably a bit similar insofar as I think if I hadn't been given responsibility, I'd have been very troublesome.
Yeah, me too, probably. Better inside the tent than outside.
Lesson learned. Nate.
Thank you very much, Prakash Mitra. Any other questions? And if you want to pose a question in French or Spanish, I'm sure we can arrange that.
Or Marathi.
Oh, Karen Adi is very enthusiastically waving.
This one's for Parami. So Parami, I was very moved to hear, well, actually, I've been moved by the whole thing, about your private ordination and what Bhante said to you about the Bodhisattva ideal. And I was just wondering how that has deepened over the years. So that was at your ordination ceremony. And then obviously now, I don't know how many years on it is, but I was just very moved by that. 45 years. So I just wondered whether, that had deepened or changed or from then to now.
It's a big question. I mean, I don't feel I can go into an awful lot of detail. It felt like my North Star. It's felt like that has been the guiding force in my Buddhist practice. But just recently, I've come to feel that maybe I'm having a different understanding of it. And I'll just try and say this very briefly, but I realized for a number of reasons that in some way I've had it slightly mixed up with the baby boomer myth of progress.
I can
So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So generationally, there seems to be myths that drive a generation. I mean, very roughly speaking. And I am a baby. Well, we're both baby boomers, aren't we? And the myth of progress, I think I believed that if I acted in accord with the Bodhisattva ideal, the world would become a better place. And I don't think it necessarily has or even will. So I've had a bit of a realization that samsara is endless and vicious. And however wonderfully my practice might go, it is not going to stop samsara from being endless and vicious. However, I feel even more strongly that the only thing I want to dedicate my life to is the Dharma and the Bodhisattva ideal. It's like there's no other choice available. So it's changed and it's not changed.
Thank you. Let's see if there's a question over this side. Abhaya Jyoti.
Boliye.
Thank you for giving us such a wonderful, all these golden memories. This question always came from curiosity actually. When Bhante was in India during the 1960s or we have, about the 65, that time in India, we have only monks, in India. And I always, think how can Bhante understood that the lay person or the upasaka, I can start this kind of sangha where all these people can be there. So this ideology about the sangha, where the married people, the grahasti, these people also can enter. They can also can get the benefit and privilege of the sangha. So the ideology behind this is came from where, and I heard that because of that Bhante get criticized also among all the Buddhist countries also, because that is not acceptable during that time. So I would like to listen about this. Thank you.
Yes, so you can trace the trajectory of Bhante's realization of the nature of the Sangha. It's very, very interesting. Of course, a lot of that is laid out in the history of my going for refuge. There's a slow progress as Bhante comes to understand more and more deeply that the principal issue is going for refuge to the three jewels, and therefore, whether you're a monk, nun, or lay person is secondary to that. Not irrelevant, but secondary to that. That slowly came to him. Even when I was looking at that notice board, when I went to the class, there was a list of the ordinations available in Triratna. And there was Upasaka, Mahaupasaka, Bodhisattva, and Bhikshu. Bhikshu was at the top. And at that time, Bhante was still thinking somewhat in those sort of lay monastic terms, although he certainly wasn't thinking that, the monks would sort of do all the work and the lay people would just sit and feed them. He wasn't thinking like that anymore. So it's a gradual process. Bhante is very disillusioned with aspects of the monastic Sangha in India that he encountered. Although he took to his teachers, mainly Tibetan teachers, he was also very critical of Tibetan Buddhism. People don't realize this. Tibetan Buddhism is as corrupt in its own way as Theravada. And Bhante, in fact, said to Maitreya Bandhu not long before he died that he had planned a book on Tibetan Buddhism and it was going to be critical, very critical. Tibetan Buddhism is all about Rinpoches. That's what keeps it all going. So there's just a new kind of hierarchy, if you see what I mean. So, Bhante slowly realized that it was commitment that counted. Now, I won't say that this necessarily influenced him, but it certainly struck him that Baba Sahib himself gave the conversion to his followers. And Bhante considered this very, very significant. There were bhikshus, many bhikshus on the stage. He received the refugees from Chandramani. But he then gave them to the 300,000 or 400,000 followers. Probably your father was there. Yeah, he was. He honored that from Baba Sahib, that he saw things in a completely different way. So that may have had some influence on him. While he was at the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara, he was very much a bhikshu. And you see things that he said and wrote at that time, and he's still talking in terms of bhikshus and lay people. But over the course of founding the order and really coming to understand that what counted was spiritual commitment, not whether you were lay or a householder, that is, or married or unmarried, or technically a monk or whatever. That wasn't the key issue. So it was a slow process of realization. And it's something that actually in India needs to be understood much, much more. I went through recently Bhante's booklet 43 years ago, which details his recognition of the sort of fundamental emptiness, hollowness of the traditional Vinaya-style monasticism. Not a monasticism in general, but of that formalistic monasticism. And that's still not really understood, even amongst our own order members in India. So your question is very pertinent. And when you come back to India, and you must come on one of my seminars and we'll go through that. And you'll get a deeper understanding. or one of what's her name? Kalyana Prabha's.
Great. Thank you very much, Bayajoti. Anyone else got a question? Over here. All the other way on the other side, Jayadi. Kerry Anna.
Keeping the translators busy here.
I was recently listening to Bante's talk, A Blueprint for a New World, which I found very inspiring. It lit a fire in me.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, from your contact with Bante, what was it that he was asking us to create as a movement? And how do you think we're doing?
Well, the talk that I mentioned as the first talk that I ever heard is from the same series, from Buddhism for Today and Tomorrow. And they completely fired me up because I really wanted to change the world.
You read them?
No, I heard Bante. They were recorded.
Yeah, okay.
He'd given them in 1976. And it was the first thing that I heard when I went to the Glasgow Buddhist Centre. It was a series. They were playing the 4 talks. I missed the one on personal development. So I've often thought was prescient, but anyway, but those 2 in particular, Nucleus of a New Society and A Blueprint for a New World, I think he was just laying out the fact that he thought the Dharma could really transform lives. I mean, they're amazing talks, and in fact, next year there will be a seminar here run by Nagabodhi, and not a seminar, sorry, the Sangha retreat. This kind of retreat run by Nagabodhi and myself and team will be on those 4 talks. Buddhism for Today and Tomorrow.
Bookings open soon. Bookings open soon.
Bookings open soon, in case you didn't hear that. But I mean, I think they're still really, really relevant. I think they need to be, obviously they need to be kind of rethought in terms of the world that we live in today. But fundamentally, the principles I would still stand by. I think they're still really important principles to do with how we work with ourselves, but also how we function. There's a whole series of talks from that time. The evolutionary extinction, a Buddhist view of current world problems, something like that.
Transformation of self and world.
Transformation. So that whole series, I mean, they're really seminal talks, and you can trace the movement's history. The seeds of the movement's history are in those talks. So thanks for asking that. And the world still needs it, maybe more than ever.
Yeah, I have to answer this one too, because that's been one of my principal inspirations. Those 4 talks.
Yeah.
I was present. I was there at the Brighton Pavilion. We used to drive down from Sukhavati, as we used to call it. The whole centre is Sukhavati, not just the one community. We used to drive down there one Wednesday every week or something like that. Were you there, Kilometre? No. And they were electrifying. We were working together with about 30 men living and working in the building at that time. And there was a women's community nearby. They were doing that up, Amaravati. And there's a strong sense that working together and living together was transformative, but we didn't have any language for it. We had no theory for it, if you like. And what Bante has done again and again is he's given a sort of framework for what is already emerging. It's not that Bante stood back and thought, we need a blueprint. It's that he saw something coming and he gave it shape. He talked it into existence as it happened. Bante considered this very important. He mentions it in the talk, doesn't he? That it's not that, you have a blueprint and then you print it out. Buddhism doesn't work like that. You work from what's going on, and then you develop from there. So Bante saw what we were doing, that we had, for the first time, a little Buddhist world in which we were living and working together. 2 little Buddhist worlds, and increasingly 3, 4, 5 little Buddhist worlds. And he was sort of producing for us the principles and even the practical theories sometimes about what that meant. It's absolute genius. He could see what was needed. I'm very interested. I don't think this is from the set that Bhante took, but in one of the sets of Bodhisattva vows, the Bodhisattva vows to gather a community, Ganna Parigraha. Is that the one?
Yeah, he studied those with Dada Rinpoche.
Yeah.
He took that after his ordination with Dada Rinpoche. He studied those precepts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So gathering a community means providing the community what it needs in terms of Dhamma, in terms of practice, in terms of even conditions. He provides them with living conditions. He provides them with clothes and so forth. So that principle, I didn't know he'd studied that, but that principle was definitely behind what he was doing or present in it, whether explicitly or not. How successful have we been? Not nearly successful enough. And I think there's a lot we need to revisit. I think we need to revisit the importance of single-sex activities. I think we need to revisit the importance of practicing and living together on a single-sex basis, but with better relations than we had in those old days, and creating more and more of a culture that supports the Dhamma. And I think we need to be particularly working hard at this because the world is very, very strongly pressing on us. We are under the influence of views that are near enemies of Buddhism. A lot of sort of what Bhante called pseudo-liberal views are sort of superficially like Buddhism, but they're not the same. And we're under a lot of pressure from those sort of views. So we need to make sure we have a world within which we're neither of the left nor the right. We're beyond all that sort of thing. We're just basing ourselves on the Dhamma. And you really need to be in contact with others, because otherwise you're in an environment where those pressures are very much on you. I've experienced this with people, particularly going to university. They're under a lot of pressure to have certain attitudes and views. And if you don't have them, you don't have friends. That's the way you connect with other people. So we need to provide a circumstance where people can live on the basis of the Dhamma and develop a culture that expresses the Dhamma. So I think what Bhante says there is more important than ever and needs greater and greater emphasis. We've come a certain way. We've also backslid quite a lot in certain quarters. And I think that still constantly we need to refresh that vision. I'm very pleased that is being studied here. We studied it in India, actually, in July. 70 of us studied those talks. And they were a revelation to people, which is a bit shocking. People didn't know those things because that's what happens. These principles don't get transmitted. They just sort of die into the background. And it's very, very important that they're constantly refreshed by going back to Bhante. Bhante will put it far better than any of us can for the time being.
Thank you. Great questions. And do you have the stamina for one more? Or?
Well, wouldn't mind just adding a little bit to the thing about those precepts. So in 1993, I had the pleasure of traveling for a couple of months in the USA with Bhante. And during that time, there were ordinations took place in Aryaloka, Karunadevi and Saramati. And there were 3 order members gave talks. There was Manjivajra, there was Parami, and there was Subhuti. And Manjivajra talked about the significance of ordinations on American soil, because it was the first time that had happened. I talked about the significance for the world, and Subhuti got the cosmos, which I would have quite liked the cosmos, but, I know my place. Anyway, in that talk, I said, I got a bit carried away, and I was saying how our order was based on the fact that Bhante had taken this Bodhisattva ordination from Dada Rinpoche. And as I said it, I realised I've no idea if that's true. Bhante was sitting there because he'd introduced the 3 of us and was sitting there. And when I looked round, he was going, nodding. So I thought,
Phew.
got that right. But it was for that reason. I spoke to him afterwards about it, and he said that the precepts actually, like, it is a bad thing not to create a community, because those precepts are, they're put in that kind of strange kind of grammatical way. And that he felt that had very much been in his mind. Not immediately consciously, but at some point it became aware to him that he was living out that bodhisattva precept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't,
Just
because
to
you mentioned that, I
it.
can't resist telling another story along those lines. But
We could just go on.
we could go on, yeah. Well, he was still at Madhyamaloka. I went up to see him one time. It went just out of that period of sleeplessness. And he was finding it tough still. And I went to see him, and I'd hardly sat down, and he said, I find this life disgusting. I'd be very happy just to go. And, you know, I'd hardly even sat down. And what do you do with that, as it were? So I said, you know, do you mean perhaps Nirveda, you know, in the spiral path? And he said, maybe. Wasn't going to commit himself, but he said, yes, I just find it aesthetically disgusting. I don't want to be in it. And he went on a bit like that, and then said something like, you know, I'm just looking forward to dying and having a rest, he said. I just want a rest. And then he said, sort of reflectively, but there is the bodhisattva vow. And I do believe in rebirth. So he left this life, as it were, with that still very much alive in him, which means, presumably, that mission is going to continue.
Dun, 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 dun.
Great. Well, maybe we should wrap it up there.
Might be a good point.
We have been thoroughly treated this afternoon. Just an absolute delight to hear from you and your experience. And I will say, you know, we are quite lucky that there are still people around.
Not for long, not for long, darling.
But not for long, you know, he knows. So, you know, if you ever have the opportunity, you know, maybe there's someone speaking at your local centre online, do take it up, you know, do take up that opportunity to hear from them, because it won't be for long. But yes, let's give Parami and Subhuti another round of applause.
Good.